Good morning, Scoop Nation. You are listening to the Morning Scoop, and it is today, Tuesday, December 20th, which means we are just 11 short days until the college football playoff between our beloved Ohio State Buckeyes and the Georgia Bulldogs. Though I say they're short days, probably going to be the longest days to date so far this year, but 11 nonetheless. So on today's episode, wanted to cover a couple things here from this past weekend. Some of the recruiting news, obviously, with Dylan Raiola dropping out of the class here, and kind of how I foresee that impacting this class as well as any future classes with Jeremiah Smith that did also commit this weekend, and those two seem to be pretty close. So will that impact it? We'll talk about a little bit about that as the early signing period approaches for the class of 2023. We'll get into some of the NIL stuff with Ohio State's collective versus some of the other ones that I've just been kind of doing some research into. Some pretty easy to notice differences between them, and it doesn't surprise me. And it doesn't surprise me, considering all of the backlash that Ohio State's NIL collective, the foundation, has been receiving. And ultimately, is it sustainable in the grand scheme of things? And then the last thing, just a quick announcement with some news coming here on the site with square offs. So we'll touch on a little bit of that. Most of the time, definitely want to talk about the NIL collectives, because I think if you've done any kind of digging, if you've looked into any of those, like I said, it's a pretty tangible difference when you go to those sites versus when you go to the foundations. But I digress. As I always mention, of course, we appreciate all of your time and effort listening and watching the podcast. So be sure to like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already, as well as check out BuckeyeScoop.com so that you can stay up to date with all the latest conversations and content coming out of everybody here at Buckeye Scoop. We've got a lot of new stuff coming, a lot of stuff that we're kind of in the works with. So definitely an exciting time to be a part of this scoop, and highly recommend you go and check it out and check out the Ask the Insiders board while you're there. So, recruiting. Is NIL the biggest factor for Dylan Raiola? Maybe. I mean, there's a lot of conversations, surrounding this past weekend around maybe some mismanagement with communication between Ryan Day and the Raiola family. I know Scoop CEO Kirk Barton has numerous times on the board said that there's a lot to untangle with this. So, we want to be respectful to the kid. We want to be respectful to his family, but, it seems like something bigger is at place. And, if a guy's just going to kind of cut off communication with other players, that he's been actively, recruiting, actively having conversations with about, coming to Ohio State, and all of a sudden he just ghosts them, then it seems like something's off, right? And not necessarily a bad thing, I think, for Ohio State. I mean, I'm kind of the mindset that if somebody wants to be at Ohio State, those are the people that we want. And if you look at some of the issues with the current status of this team and, not maybe taking the game as seriously as other players have, like, those are the kids that take the game seriously, or the kids that want to be at Ohio State and the kids that want to compete and just be a dog, rather than going somewhere to go and compete for a championship because you know the brand. I mean, that's definitely a part of it, but I would rather have some kids that are going to come in and be dogs and just compete and go out there and want to win for Ohio State, not just to improve their draft stock as well. So is it the end of the world? Would I have loved to have had Dylan Raiola in this class? Absolutely. I mean, number one player in the country, you can't not want that kid to come play for you. But am I also confident in Ryan Day to be able to find somebody like a Devin Brown potentially, or somebody else in this class to replace Dylan Raiola? Also, yes. As TLDR, as long as Ohio State has Ryan Day for quarterbacks, as long as Ohio State has Brian Hartline for wide receivers, you can do a lot with those two positions in and of itself, and you'll win a lot of games, especially in the Big Ten. Unfortunately, the Big Ten isn't super competitive. I mean, you've got a couple teams at the top that are going to be your most competitive every year, and I think Ohio State is going to maintain that standpoint at the top of the Big Ten and be able to be competitive regardless of, Dylan Raiola or getting the number one player in any class. So I'm not super concerned about the state of recruiting. Still a top 10 class right now. Still time to finish in the top 5 as well. There's still some big name targets. There's discussions of Mateo, missing out on all 3 of the big kind of 5-star defensive linemen. We'll see, he's supposed to announce tomorrow, so who knows? You could shock the world, if you will, and pick Ohio State over USC, as some of the crystal balls and things have been coming in for him for there. But I again still have just full confidence in this staff. I think they're going to pick up some guys maybe late in the cycle to finish it off. I think Kyan Lee, I would love to keep him, but at the end of the day, I want people that want to play for Ohio State. And if that means we lose out on some of these guys that have been committed for a while because they want to go make money somewhere else, more power to you. I 100% understand that, but, I will take the guys that want to stick with this class, want to compete, and want to ultimately, win championships for Ohio State. And if those aren't the guys, they're not the guys. But the early signing day is tomorrow, so we should know a lot more about what this class is ultimately going to look like. And kind of where some of the gaps are that we maybe need to fill in the transfer portal. Maybe we need to fill with some late flips or other conversations that need to happen. But, Raiola decommitting, it's not the end of the world. I know a lot of Buckeye fans think that it is, but let's just pump the brakes, guys. Ohio State is not, burning to the ground. We're still going to be a top 5 team in the country pretty much every single year. And we just got to get now over that hump of, unfortunately, having to beat Michigan again. So, which I think we will, I think we will next year, double digits, calling it again right now. But there's another thing that I think is a little bit more, not disparaging. I think that's not the right word, but definitely something that needs to be addressed and needs to be worked on, because as we all know, NIL is going to be a pretty big part of the recruiting landscape for pretty much the foreseeable future, I would imagine. Do I think that it can be sustained as what it is right now, essentially just Wild West, everybody throwing around money and trying to get these kids to just come and sign on their letter of intent to show up to campus and then a year later enter the transfer portal? No, I don't think that's sustainable. And I don't think that a lot of donors are going to be able to sustain that or will be willing to sustain that for the long term. If guys at Texas A&M, if they keep throwing money at these NIL kids and then they come for a year, make their money and leave, things are going to change at Texas A&M. They're going to have clauses in place to make sure that they're getting clawbacks, or that, those contracts are, more ironclad to, I guess, just be, help avoid that, and it's just going to come naturally. I don't think that, again, NIL is going to be this way for much longer, maybe a few years, but also at the same time, a lot of the conversations about kids at other schools getting money up front, schools like Georgia or Texas A&M or Alabama or whatever, Miami, that are offering kids just X amount of dollars up front. Guess what? They've been doing that illegally forever anyways. So nothing has really changed. Ohio State has always lost recruits because of that in a lot of ways. But so to me, it doesn't make that big of a difference now all of a sudden that it's legal, for the time being, to be able to do that. They were doing it before. It was just behind closed doors. And they're going to continue to do it to an extent. Now that people know, I think that can also then lead to a little bit more the caution behind it. And eventually somebody has to step in and kind of put regulations in place over it. But I think to me, the biggest thing here that I see in where Ohio State's gap is just the NIL collective itself. I mean, so the foundation, I think it's great what they do. I think it's great having a 501c as an NIL collective to get these kids more involved in the community, to give back to the fans and to the people around them that are supporting them. But is it sustainable when you're having to compete against a bunch of for-profit university collectives? No, like never. A 501c, a nonprofit, is never going to be able to compete effectively against a for-profit outlet like this. You look at some of these other NIL collectives, across the country, and the top, I guess, most successful ones, starting here with Aspire Sports Group for Tennessee. They outright say they have a goal of $25 million annually, which is great. But Ohio State has come out and said that they need a goal of $13 million annually. So how is that gap? Why is that gap there? What is the other $12 million going to, for the Spire Sports Group, for Tennessee players? I mean, if you're essentially doubling the amount that the players can make, and again, I know it crosses every sport, whatever, but that's still double. I mean, something has to give at some point. And yeah, those kids are going to be enticed if you get double the money to just go play at Tennessee when Tennessee is maybe seen as coming back also. I mean, they've got good things going down there in Knoxville, and if the money is there, then kids are going to start going. It's just going to happen. And they're also just very blunt about their role in recruiting and how impactful and how important it is that the NIL collective itself actually gets involved with that. And they also have a 501c arm associated with Spire Sports Group to be able to give back to the community and get the kids involved more with that. So that, I think, to me is is how it should be approached. If you want to give back to the community, I think that that's an important part, and I think that that should be something considered for NIL. I think it should be a big part, but it shouldn't be necessarily the entirety of it. And you look at the foundation's website, and I mean, it's evident. Yes, obviously, a lot of it is going to be geared towards, hey, we need donations to make this work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But everything on the foundation's website is just about them. There's very little about like what actually the kids are doing. Very little evidence that they're out there giving back to the community. I know there was an event this past weekend that they had promoted and put out there, but a lot of like the even videos just on the website are just players endorsing the foundation. It's essentially just an outlet for Cardale Jones and Brian Schottenstein to say, hey, we should be worth your donation. Here's why we are worth it, as opposed to saying, here's what we're doing for these kids. Here's how you can support this team. Here's how you can support us so that we can then support the team. Just, it seems off. And you look at a lot of these other websites, and it's not that. It's very much player focused, fan focused. They have subscription models where you're able to pay a monthly fee and you get exclusive benefits, exclusive merchandise, autographed memorabilia. You get conversations with the players. You have Zoom meetings with them. Like, there's a lot of stuff that NIL collectives like Florida's is a big one, especially with like it's very fan focused. The Gator Collective, and it's also directly affiliated with the university. And the foundation, it's advertised, but it's not. I mean, we've heard the conversations about Gene Smith, actively like not trying to get donors to, actively donate to the foundation. He wants them to donate to the school itself, which makes sense. But the two should be working in tandem as opposed to working against each other. And right now they're working against each other. Whereas a lot of these that you look at, that are successful are working together with the university to make it the most impactful. And the one I saw that was actually the most impressive, in my opinion, and I don't think this comes as a surprise, if you're on the boards at least, is Boulevard for USC. Just looking at their website, I mean, it's super clean. There's a ton of actual like evidence. There's a ton of content on the site that's direct with players. They have a podcast series where they, players actually host. And I know Columbus NIL Club, which is smaller. I don't know that many people really know about that. That was a player started one for Ohio State. I think Taryn Vincent, Mitch Rossi, uh, Taraja Mitchell, and Zach Harrison were kind of like the main guys that started it. And a lot of schools do it. It's player run, and there are some subscriptions and things like that that you can sign up for with that. But it's very not known. Boulevard, obviously, because it's the main NIL collective, very well known, very well put together. They work with it's a company called Stay Doubted, which is a media agency essentially, and they work with companies like Verizon, Lululemon, Amazon. So there's a lot of money backed behind it as well, and there's just a ton of information about it, but it's all very much focused on the players, on the athletes, and on your ability as fans to contribute and also get something out of it as well, which I don't see that from the foundation. Obviously, it's a 501c. You can't really do that, which I get, but that's why I also say you're still not going to be able to compete if that's the case, because a lot of these, Boulevard is considered to be what the future of NIL collectives are going to look like. And if that's the case, then you've got to branch out and you've got to put it together and create something that's similar and that's competitive. And with Ohio State's alumni base, you should be able to do that pretty easily. One of the ones too that was really interesting to me was Texas A&M, because there's nothing. They operate in complete obscurity. There's no website. There's no list anywhere of any of their founders, of any of the money that they're actually generating from donors. Nothing. I mean, there's just nothing. They've relied heavily on word of mouth of players telling other players what they can make and how it can work, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and recruits telling other recruits. And it's worked, which is just absurd to say the fact that you can have absolutely nothing out there and still be as successful as Texas A&M has been with NIL, because players talk. These kids are going to talk to each other, and it makes sense, but that was one to me where I was just kind of shocked that the fund, is what it's called, doesn't have anything anywhere tangible that you can actually look at, but it works. And if even for the foundation, it's shocking that it hasn't worked as well as something like that just essentially doesn't exist. And maybe it's a little nefarious. Maybe they're not doing everything the right way, which means you can't really have anything anywhere online. I get it. But if they're generating tens of millions of dollars like it's suspected that they are, then they're doing something right. And it's got to be something where if you're Gene Smith, if you're Ohio State, you have to start looking at things like this. And unless you want to get left behind really quickly, you need to make changes and you need to create something that is going to be what the future of NIL looks like. And right now, it's not the foundation. The foundation essentially is just an outlet for Brian Schottenstein to, I don't know, I've seen it a couple times where it's said that he's just using it as a way to fanboy and support the players that he likes, talk to the players that he likes, whatever. If that's the case, then just dissolve it, because there's going to come a time, especially when these nonprofits have to start abiding by their own regulations, and if they want to maintain that status, who knows what the actual legislation is going to be that comes out that prevents that, but it's being discussed. I know that, so long term, it may just have to naturally go away. And if there's nothing else to take its place, then that's a problem. Then I think Ohio State has a problem. Right now, Ohio State doesn't have a problem. Ohio State is always going to be, as long as we're winning, there's going to be a destination place for a lot of elite athletes to come and play. And as long as Ryan Day and Brian Hartline and Larry Johnson, to an extent, and he's having a down cycle, but the last couple of years have been pretty good. I mean, as long as they're there, I'm confident, and I don't see a big problem right now, but I see a big problem in the future based on what I'm seeing from some of these other sites. Now, a couple things to note also real quick before we jump into the last piece here. Ohio State, if you looked at kind of the most successful NIL collectives to date, I think it was by On3 that I got this list. Ohio State was number 7 on this list. Tennessee's was 1, Miami's 2, Texas A&M 3, Oregon's was 4, Florida's was 5, Boulevard was 6, and Foundation 7. And a couple of just quick notes. Alabama's High Tide Traditions, that's what it's called, was actually 10th. And Georgia's Classic City Collective was 11th. And Michigan's was actually 12th. So we've always lost kids to Alabama. We've always lost kids to Georgia, especially those elite talent coming from the South. That's not going to change. The fact that their NIL collectives are considered less, successful than Ohio State's right now is should be a little bit, I think, reassuring, just because they're still getting players, And yeah, they're probably still paying them up front, but guess what? They were doing that before. Nothing has really changed in that regard. So Ohio State has to make some changes on the NIL front. They've got to get with kind of some of these bigger, more successful, more impactful NIL collectives, and you got to do it pretty quick, because I think NIL is going to change pretty quickly, and it's going to become what it will be long term, sooner rather than later. And the last piece here, just a quick announcement. So we are starting something with a company called Square Offs, where we will be posting a weekly poll question. And this will be sourced by myself. I'll kind of be, handling the posting of all this. It'll be posted on the website. It'll be up and running constantly via a polls page, as well as on the front page, as well as in the forums. So there's going to be a ton of places where you can actually go to vote on these poll questions. But we want your input as well. So in the comments below, if you have a question that you want to see on a future poll, definitely drop that in the comments, and we'll be sure to kind of amass a database of all these poll questions to get those up. We will have a regular weekly kind of cadence with that, but I also am going to start posting some of the questions that come out of these podcasts on a separate thread. So just be on the lookout. And again, all of this is going to be available at BuckeyeScoop.com. So be sure to check out BuckeyeScoop.com on the Ask the Insiders board as we kind of continue to roll out this feature, as well as some of the other features and interesting kind of changes that will be implemented here with some new podcasts potentially, as well as some new content and some new ways to interact with all of us here at Buckeye Scoop. So as always, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Go Bucks.